A doorbell camera mounted on a brick townhouse across the street records a quiet residential block in Northwood, Pennsylvania on the afternoon of October 17th. At exactly 2:47 in the afternoon, a marked utility service van pulls up to the curb in front of a beige single-family home at the end of a cul-de-sac. The driver steps out, wearing a navy blue municipal maintenance uniform, reflective stripes on the sleeves, official patch stitched onto the chest, clipboard in one hand, tool bag in the other. His name is Marcus Hale, 32 years old, employed by the Regional Water and Infrastructure Department for 7 years. No disciplinary record, no complaints, no history of missed shifts. This visit is logged as routine. Meter inspection and pressure check. Stop number 33 on a route scheduled to finish before 5 in the evening. Watch carefully. Marcus walks up the narrow concrete path, adjusts the strap of his bag, checks the address one more time, then presses the doorbell. Inside the house lives Evelyn Carter, 58 years old, divorced, works remotely as a medical billing specialist. No children, no roommates, no pets, lives alone. The door opens. Evelyn appears in the doorway wearing reading glasses and a gray sweater. A short conversation follows. No audio is recorded, but body language tells the story. The man in uniform gestures toward the clipboard. The homeowner nods. Then something changes. The utility worker points toward the interior hallway. Evelyn hesitates. Exactly 3 seconds. Then the door opens wider. Marcus steps inside. The door closes behind him. That is the last confirmed footage of either of them together. What you are looking at is 21 seconds of video from a neighbor's security system. 21 seconds. That is all investigators would have for the next 9 days. No struggle, no raised voices, no sign of danger, just a uniform, a clipboard, and a door closing. And what happened after that door closed would become one of the most disturbing missing person cases in the history of Allegheny County. Here is what everyone believed at first. Routine inspection, brief paperwork, professional interaction, the kind of visit that happens thousands of times every week across the country. Nothing unusual, nothing suspicious, nothing that would make a homeowner feel unsafe. That was the assumption. For the first 72 hours, authorities treated this as a simple case of delayed reporting. Maybe the worker forgot to log out. Maybe the resident fell ill. Maybe phones were misplaced. Maybe schedules overlapped. Minor administrative confusion. All of it was wrong. This was not routine. This was not coincidence. And the man who walked through that door was not who he claimed to be. Let me tell you about Marcus first, because Marcus deserves to be more than a name in a report. Marcus Hale grew up in Beaver Falls, graduated from Riverside High School, played defensive back on the football team, average student, reliable worker. After graduation, he joined the county maintenance program, learned pipe systems, meter calibration, emergency repairs. The job paid modestly, but it was stable. Health insurance, retirement plan, predictable hours. At 24, he married his high school girlfriend, Lauren. At 27, they had a daughter, Maya. At 30, they bought a small house near the river. Co-workers described Marcus as dependable, the first to volunteer for weekend shifts, the one who stayed late to help finish inspections. The employee supervisors trusted with sensitive routes. His route on October 17th covered older homes with aging infrastructure. Nothing unusual, no flagged addresses, no safety alerts. He clocked in at 6:30 in the morning. By 2:30 in the afternoon, he had completed 32 stops. The visit to Evelyn Carter's home was scheduled for 12 minutes. He never checked out. Now let me tell you about Evelyn. Evelyn Carter moved into that house 12 years earlier after her divorce. Her ex-husband relocated to Ohio. She stayed, built a quiet routine. Morning walks, remote work, weekly grocery delivery, occasional dinners with neighbors, no history of conflict, no restraining orders, no disputes, no suspicious associations. Neighbors described her as cautious but polite, the kind of person who verified service calls, the kind who kept doors locked at night, the kind who rarely let strangers inside, except on that afternoon, except when a man in uniform appeared with official markings and paperwork. except when every visual signal suggested legitimacy. Phone records show Evelyn received an automated service notification 3 days earlier, a generic message stating that infrastructure inspections would occur within the next week. No specific date, no name, no contact number. It was enough. Enough to lower suspicion. Enough to make the visit seem expected. Enough to make opening the door feel reasonable. What the cameras did not capture happened inside. Investigators would later reconstruct the timeline using digital records, forensic evidence, and recovered devices. According to that reconstruction, the first 10 minutes were normal. Water pressure checks, clipboard notes, casual conversation. Then something shifted. In the kitchen, 2 mugs were removed from the cabinet. Coffee was poured. One mug contained a clear liquid later identified as a fast-acting muscle relaxant mixed with ethanol. Tasteless, odorless, purchased online under a false name. Delivered to a vacant address 3 weeks earlier, the dosage was calculated precisely. Enough to cause dizziness in 4 minutes. Enough to cause paralysis in 8. Enough to prevent resistance. Marcus never returned to his vehicle. At 3:18 in the afternoon, his department tablet stopped transmitting location data. At 3:22, his phone powered down. At 4:10, Evelyn's internet router was unplugged. At 4:35, security cameras inside the house were disabled. No one noticed. No alarms were triggered. No alerts were sent. At 5:15, a co-worker tried calling Marcus to confirm an equipment request. No answer. At 6:40, Lauren called her husband. No answer. At 7:30, she called again. No answer. At 8:50, she contacted his supervisor. By 9:30, a missing employee report was filed. Officers arrived at Evelyn's house shortly after midnight. The lights were off. The driveway was empty. No response at the door. They ran the address. No criminal history. No warrants. No red flags. They left a notice and drove away. Because at that moment, Marcus Hale was still alive. He was no longer in that house. He was already being transported, bound, sedated, unconscious, in the back of a rented cargo van registered under a fake identity. The man who had worn the uniform had planned every step. The uniform was stolen from a locker room 6 months earlier. The van was rented under forged documents. The badge was printed using commercial equipment. The paperwork was copied from publicly available templates. Nothing was improvised. Nothing was accidental. Everything was deliberate, and this was not the first time. But no one knew that yet. Not the police, not the family, not the neighbors, not the department. All they knew was that a worker had vanished during a routine visit, and a woman had disappeared inside her own home. 2 lives erased in less than 30 minutes, with no witnesses, no screams, no broken doors, no visible crime scene, just a doorbell camera, a uniform. By the 4th day of the investigation, detectives from Allegheny County had reached an uncomfortable conclusion. Nothing about the disappearance of Marcus Hale resembled an accident. Nothing about the silence surrounding Evelyn Carter's home suggested coincidence. Every missing data point pointed in the same direction. Preparation. The first breakthrough came from an overlooked detail in the service logs. Marcus had not been scheduled to visit that address. Not officially. The infrastructure department confirmed that the inspection route assigned for October 17th did not include Carter's residence. The automated notification system had generated a general advisory for the entire neighborhood, but no technician had been dispatched there. Someone had inserted that address into a private planning system. Someone outside the department. Someone with access to internal templates. That discovery shifted the case from missing persons to organized abduction. Investigators began treating the disappearance as a coordinated operation. The next step was digital reconstruction. Every device connected to Marcus and Evelyn was examined. Phones, tablets, laptops, home routers, smart meters, vehicle trackers, cloud accounts, social media histories, financial records. Nothing was excluded. Within 48 hours, analysts identified a pattern that had gone unnoticed. 6 months before the abduction, multiple online searches began appearing under burner accounts. Searches for municipal uniforms, searches for badge replicas, searches for industrial sedatives, searches for cargo van rentals, searches for outdated security camera models, searches for suburban properties with limited street visibility. Each query came from different IP addresses, different devices, different prepaid networks, but all of them routed through the same anonymizing infrastructure. A private relay system operating on overseas servers. Someone had built a digital smokescreen, and built it carefully. Financial investigators followed the money. Over the previous year, small cash withdrawals appeared across 5 counties, amounts never exceeding $400, always below reporting thresholds, always withdrawn from different ATMs, always followed by purchases of prepaid cards. Those cards were later traced to online marketplaces selling specialized equipment, surveillance gear, locking restraints, chemical compounds, industrial cleaning agents, portable generators. None of it illegal on its own. All of it suspicious together. The purchases formed a supply chain, and that supply chain pointed to 3 primary organizers. The first was Daniel Rourke, 46 years old, former private security contractor, discharged after falsifying incident reports, lived in a rural property outside Butler, no stable employment, no recent tax filings, no permanent address records. The second was Thomas Velez, 39 years old, IT technician, previously worked for a regional hospital network, terminated for unauthorized database access, skilled in network anonymization, encryption, digital erasure. The third was Aaron Klein, 51 years old, former logistics manager, experience in freight routing, warehouse leasing, transportation scheduling, the missing link between planning and execution. These 3 men had known each other for nearly a decade. They met through fringe online forums centered on extremist ideology, private message boards, encrypted chat rooms, invitation-only groups, spaces built around shared beliefs that framed violence as moral duty. Participants did not refer to crimes as crimes. They used coded language, operations, corrections, realignments, removals. Targets were called variables. Locations were called nodes. Victims were stripped of identity long before physical contact. This language mattered, because language created distance. Distance made brutality easier. Records recovered from seized devices revealed that Evelyn's home had been selected 8 months earlier. Satellite imagery was studied, traffic flow analyzed, garbage collection schedules mapped, neighbor routines observed, delivery patterns recorded, utility maintenance cycles monitored. Every variable was calculated. The house sat at the end of a cul-de-sac, limited through traffic. No direct sight lines from main roads. Trees blocking rear visibility. No active neighborhood watch. Outdated alarm system. No exterior floodlights. Perfect. The next phase was infiltration. Rourke handled physical resources, uniform acquisition, vehicle sourcing, equipment storage. A rented storage unit under a deceased person's identity contained duplicate outfits, badges, boots, and toolkits, each set labeled by size and region. Velez handled communications, fake service emails, spoofed department notifications, auto-generated robocalls, website replicas, customer portals designed to mimic official systems. Evelyn received 3 fabricated notifications before October, each one reinforcing legitimacy, each one lowering suspicion. Klein handled logistics, route simulations, timing windows, traffic models, Emergency response estimates. Maps showed average police response times by block, calculated down to seconds, escape corridors, transfer points, safe locations. The abduction itself was rehearsed, at least 4 times. GPS records from rental vehicles placed Rourke near the residence months earlier, late at night, walking the perimeter, measuring distances, testing sight lines, recording angles. A portable camera recovered later contained mock footage, simulated approaches, practice knock sequences, timing drills. Nothing was spontaneous. The sedative used in the coffee was part of a controlled protocol. Dosage charts were found in Klein's handwriting. Notes included absorption rates, onset times, interaction effects, contingency doses, emergency suppressants, medical precision applied to criminal intent. After incapacitation, Marcus was transferred to a secondary location, a decommissioned cold storage facility north of Cranberry Township. Leased through shell companies, paid in cryptocurrency, electricity rerouted illegally, soundproofing installed, interior partitions built. This facility served as a holding site, a place for interrogation, documentation, recording. Investigators later referred to it as the processing site, because that was exactly how it functioned. Recovered hard drives contained time-stamped files, video recordings, audio logs, biometric data, transcripts, each file cataloged, each victim reduced to data. The motive was not financial. No ransom demands, no extortion, no theft. The motive was ideological. The group believed certain professions symbolized institutional control. Delivery workers, utility employees, public service technicians. Uniforms represented authority, trust, access. Targets were chosen because society taught people to open doors for uniforms, because compliance had been normalized, because politeness could be exploited. Marcus represented that system. So did Evelyn. Both were considered acceptable casualties. Internal communications confirmed this. Messages referred to collateral variables, acceptable losses, necessary disruption. One document titled Protocol 7 outlined procedures for residential extractions, step by step, notification phase, approach phase, engagement phase, neutralization phase, transfer phase, sanitation phase, exit phase. Every phase had checklists, failure contingencies, backup options, time limits. This was not a hobby. This was an operation. The scale shocked investigators. Data recovered from cloud backups revealed at least 9 completed operations over 7 years, across 4 states, different victims, similar patterns, uniform impersonation, isolated properties, temporary facilities, rapid relocation, evidence disposal. Some cases had been ruled accidental, others remained unsolved. All were connected, and none had been linked before, because each cell operated semi-independently, shared ideology, shared resources, but fragmented execution. That fragmentation was intentional. It prevented total exposure. If one cell collapsed, others remained intact. What went wrong in this case was overconfidence. Velas reused an encryption key. Klein miscalculated cellular triangulation near the holding site. Rourke failed to destroy a backup drive. Small errors, cumulative consequences. By the time authorities understood the scope, the organization was already collapsing. But the damage was done. Marcus was gone. Evelyn was gone. And the system that had consumed them had been functioning quietly for years. Part 3. By the time federal authorities formally joined the investigation, the case had already outgrown every local framework designed to contain it. What began as a missing utility worker and an unexplained residential disappearance had transformed into a multi-state counter-terrorism-level operation involving digital forensics units, behavioral analysts, financial crimes specialists, and covert surveillance teams. The Federal Bureau of Investigation assumed jurisdiction on the 9th day. That decision was driven by one discovery: a recovered encrypted file labeled Cycle 12. Inside the file was a timetable: 7 future dates, 7 locations, 7 marked residential nodes, each scheduled less than 3 weeks apart, each located within 200 miles of the previous site, each following the same structural pattern. Cul-de-sac, limited visibility, low police density, high uniform traffic. The implication was immediate. More abductions were planned, and the next one was already scheduled. Task Force Atlas was formed within 24 hours. More than 100 agents, representatives from Homeland Security, state police, cybercrime units, transportation authorities, utility companies, private telecom providers. Every relevant agency was integrated. Jurisdictional barriers were suspended. Data sharing became unrestricted. Real-time intelligence fusion became standard. The priority shifted from prosecution to prevention. Stopping the next operation mattered more than building the perfect case. Analysts focused first on communications. Velez's compromised encryption network became the entry point. Specialists exploited key reuse vulnerabilities: metadata leakage, timing correlations, packet signature patterns. Within 36 hours, partial access to internal channels was achieved. Not full decryption, but enough to observe activity, enough to identify patterns, enough to predict movement. Messages indicated accelerated relocation, emergency protocols, rapid dispersal, contingency activation. The organization knew exposure was underway. Members were abandoning established sites, destroying hardware, burning documents, switching identities. The digital infrastructure began collapsing. Simultaneously, financial investigators froze dozens of shell accounts. Cryptocurrency wallets were traced. Exchanges were subpoenaed. Conversion points were identified. Cash flow networks were mapped. Funds were drying up. Logistics became harder. Operations slowed. Transportation specialists tracked rental vehicles. Patterns emerged: cargo vans, utility trucks, unmarked box trucks, all rented under layered identities. But GPS telemetry revealed convergence zones, rest stops, truck depots, industrial parks. One location appeared repeatedly: a freight yard outside Youngstown, Ohio. Satellite imagery confirmed unusual nighttime activity: temporary structures, portable generators, vehicle turnover. Thermal scans detected human presence after midnight. Surveillance teams were deployed: unmarked units, aerial drones, remote microphones, motion sensors, license plate readers. Everything pointed to a staging hub. On the 14th day, confirmation arrived. A convoy entered the yard shortly after 2 in the morning. 3 vehicles, 1 cargo van, 2 pickup trucks, personnel wearing work uniforms, equipment transfer observed, no attempt at concealment, confidence bordering on carelessness. Tactical command authorized observation only. Intervention required certainty. Inside one of the vehicles, biometric sensors detected heart rate variability consistent with sedation. Thermal imaging revealed restrained movement. Someone was inside. Alive. The decision to intervene was made at 4:18 in the morning. State troopers blocked exits. Federal agents breached perimeter fencing. Helicopters provided aerial overwatch. Floodlights illuminated the yard. Commands were issued. Compliance was not immediate. One suspect attempted escape. Taser deployment ended that attempt. Another individual attempted to destroy a laptop. The device was seized mid-ignition. Within 8 minutes, 6 operatives were in custody. Inside the cargo van, authorities found Marcus Hale. Dehydrated, malnourished, sedated, alive. Barely. Emergency medical teams transported the victim to a trauma center within minutes. Doctors later confirmed that survival depended on timing. Another 12 hours would have been fatal. But Marcus was not the only discovery. Inside a locked container near the warehouse perimeter, investigators located remains. 2 unidentified victims, later matched to cold cases from Indiana and Kentucky. The full scope was becoming visible. Interrogations began immediately. Psychological specialists conducted parallel sessions, strategic separation, information compartmentalization, controlled disclosure. Rourke was captured 3 days later in West Virginia, using forged documents, living in a rented trailer, surrounded by survival gear, prepared for long-term evasion. Klein was located in Arizona 2 weeks later, attempting to cross into Mexico, detained at a checkpoint after biometric mismatch. Velez vanished for 27 days. During that period, encrypted messages continued sporadically. Misdirection, false trails, decoy locations. Finally, a financial anomaly revealed the location: a prepaid card used to purchase fuel near Flagstaff, linked to a dormant wallet. Surveillance followed: a cabin in Coconino National Forest, remote, off-grid, hidden. Federal marshals executed the warrant at dawn. No resistance, no weapons, no denial, only silence. With leadership neutralized, remaining cells collapsed. Raids were conducted across 5 states. Safe houses dismantled, storage units seized, servers confiscated, evidence warehouses filled. More than 600 terabytes of data were cataloged. Hundreds of victims' files, photographs, recordings, planning documents, operational manuals. Prosecutors described it as one of the largest domestic extremist dismantlements in modern history. The trial lasted 14 months. Testimony from digital analysts, behavioral experts, medical professionals, former associates, survivors, Marcus testified. Voice unsteady, details precise, descriptions clinical, trauma translated into facts. Evelyn Carter's fate was confirmed through recovered recordings. The homeowner did not survive the initial transfer. Cause of death: respiratory failure induced by overdose. The sentencing was unanimous: multiple life sentences, no parole, no reductions, no transfers, permanent federal custody. Yet convictions did not erase consequences. Families were left with fragments, partial answers, incomplete remains, psychological scars. Marcus required years of rehabilitation, neurological damage, chronic pain, post-traumatic stress. Employment ended. Normalcy altered permanently. Infrastructure departments across the country rewrote protocols. 2-factor verification for service visits, real-time biometric tracking, body cameras, mandatory escorts for residential access, public education campaigns, uniform authentication systems. Some changes saved lives. Others arrived too late. Because the real lesson was simpler. Trust had been engineered into vulnerability. Politeness had been weaponized. Routine had been converted into access. The organization did not exploit weakness. It exploited normal behavior. Opening doors, offering coffee, assuming legitimacy, believing in systems. Marcus survived because timing failed. Others were not as fortunate. And somewhere, in archived evidence rooms and sealed court records, hundreds of names remain. People who answered doors. People who believed uniforms. People who followed rules. People who vanished. This was not randomness. This was design. This was planning. This was ideology-given structure. And it only ended because small mistakes accumulated faster than concealment could compensate. Because no system is perfect. Because even the most calculated operations eventually leave traces. And because vigilance, once awakened, is difficult to suppress. This is how the manhunt ended. This is how the network collapsed. And this is why every doorbell camera, every service notification, every uniform now carries a question that did not exist before. Is this real, or is this another operation waiting to begin? April 17th, at 3:42 in the afternoon, a camera mounted in the corner of a marble lobby inside the Riverside Tower captures a man in a navy suit stepping toward the elevators. He presses the button for the 22nd floor. He checks his watch. He looks calm. 3 seconds later, a woman enters the frame. Blonde hair pulled back, black leather folder in her hand, phone pressed to her ear. She slows when she sees him. They exchange a brief glance. The elevator doors open. Watch carefully. He steps inside first. She follows. No one else joins them. The doors close at exactly 3:43 in the afternoon. At 3:47, the elevator doors open again on the 22nd floor. Only one person walks out. What happened inside that elevator in 4 minutes changed the trajectory of a billion-dollar merger, triggered a federal investigation, and left one woman dead before the paramedics even arrived. Here is what everyone assumed at first. The man in the Navy suit was named Daniel Kessler, 41 years old, chief financial officer of a fast-growing biotech firm headquartered in Chicago. Married, 2 children, graduate of Northwestern University. No criminal record, no history of violence. The kind of executive whose photograph appears in annual reports beside words like innovation and leadership. The woman who stepped inside after him was named Laura Bennett, 34 years old, senior compliance attorney at the same company. She had joined the firm 18 months earlier after leaving a prestigious law practice downtown. Colleagues described her as precise, intense, and unwilling to ignore irregularities. At 3:51 in the afternoon, an assistant on the 22nd floor called 911. She reported that a man had stumbled out of the elevator, shouting that someone inside needed help. When building security forced the doors back open, Laura Bennett was lying on the floor of the elevator car. She was unconscious. She would be pronounced dead at 4:23 in the afternoon at Northwestern Memorial Hospital. The initial explanation was simple: medical emergency, cardiac arrest, perhaps an undiagnosed condition. Laura had been working long hours. Stress, too much caffeine, not enough sleep. Tragic, but natural. That was the story for the first 48 hours. It was wrong, because what the lobby camera shows is only the beginning. There is another camera inside the elevator itself. The building used a standard security system manufactured by Otis Elevator Company. The footage is grainy, black and white, no audio. At 3:43 and 11 seconds, Daniel Kessler stands facing the doors. Laura Bennett stands to his right, still holding her phone. At 3:43 and 20 seconds, she lowers the phone. She says something. He turns slightly toward her. At 3:44 exactly, he reaches into his jacket. Investigators would later freeze this frame. His hand emerges holding what appears to be a pen. He steps closer. Laura's posture changes immediately. She leans back. Her mouth opens. At 3:44 and 6 seconds, he presses the object against the side of her neck. The footage shakes slightly as the elevator continues its ascent. For 9 seconds, he holds it there. Then he steps back. Laura remains upright for approximately 20 seconds. She appears confused. She touches her neck. At 3:44 and 40 seconds, her knees buckle. Daniel does not attempt to catch her. He watches. At 3:45 and 12 seconds, she collapses fully onto the elevator floor. He waits. At 3:46 and 50 seconds, as the elevator nears the 22nd floor, he kneels briefly beside her. He touches her wrist. He looks at the camera, directly at it. Then the doors open. He steps over her body and exits into the hallway. This is the part that shocked investigators. He does not run. He does not appear panicked. He walks 10 steps down the corridor, then begins shouting for help. When officers from the Chicago Police Department arrived, Daniel told them Laura had suddenly collapsed. He claimed she had complained of dizziness during the ride. He said he tried to help her, but she fell too quickly. There was a small red mark on the side of her neck. He said she must have hit something on the way down. The object in his hand, the pen, was recovered from his jacket pocket. It was not a pen. It was a spring-loaded injector, disguised in a pen casing. Laboratory analysis later identified traces of a synthetic neuromuscular blocking agent, a substance capable of causing rapid respiratory failure while leaving minimal external evidence. Within hours, the case shifted from unexplained death to homicide. But this is where it becomes more complex. Daniel Kessler did not attempt to flee. He surrendered his phone voluntarily. He consented to a search of his office. He even agreed to an initial interview without an attorney present. He repeated the same statement 3 times. Laura felt faint. He tried to assist. He did not know what happened. When confronted with the elevator footage showing him pressing the device against her neck, he did not deny it. He said it was insulin. He claimed Laura had diabetes and had asked him privately for help because she did not want colleagues to know. There was just one problem. Laura Bennett did not have diabetes. Her medical records were clear, and the substance found in her bloodstream was not insulin. By the second day, federal agents from the Federal Bureau of Investigation were involved. Not because of the murder alone, but because of where it occurred and who was involved. Riverside Tower housed multiple financial firms and a pending merger valued at over $2 billion. Laura Bennett had been reviewing internal compliance reports connected to that merger. On the morning of April 17th, she had sent an email marked urgent to 3 board members requesting a private meeting. That meeting was scheduled for 4:15 in the afternoon, 30 minutes after she died. Here is what most people did not know at the time. Laura had accessed restricted financial data the previous evening. She had downloaded files onto an encrypted drive. Those files were not found in her office. They were not in her apartment. They were not in her email. They were missing. The narrative shifted again. This was no longer a sudden act of violence in a confined space. This was targeted, premeditated, and executed in one of the most surveilled environments imaginable. Why choose an elevator? Because an elevator offers 4 critical advantages: limited witnesses, controlled duration, predictable route, and plausible deniability if the victim appears to suffer a medical episode. But Daniel Kessler made one mistake. At 3:38 in the afternoon, 5 minutes before entering the elevator, lobby cameras show him standing alone near a column. He appears to adjust something inside his jacket pocket. Investigators enhanced the footage. He primes the injector. That means he knew exactly what he intended to do before Laura ever stepped inside. The official timeline now reads as follows. 3:35 in the afternoon, Laura Bennett leaves her office on the 18th floor and heads downstairs to print documents in the lobby business center. 3:39 in the afternoon, Daniel Kessler exits a private meeting on the 22nd floor and takes the stairs down to the lobby rather than using the elevator. 3:42 in the afternoon, both individuals converge near the elevator bank. 3:43 in the afternoon, they enter the same elevator. 3:44 in the afternoon, the injection occurs. 3:47 in the afternoon, only one person walks out. In the days that followed, Daniel was formally charged with first-degree murder. But the central question remained unanswered. Why would a chief financial officer of a successful company commit murder in his own office building, in broad daylight, on camera? The answer would begin to surface only after forensic accountants started examining the very files Laura Bennett had been reviewing. And when those numbers came into focus, investigators realized the elevator was not the beginning of this crime. It was the final step of a plan that had been unfolding for months. That is where Part 2 begins. By the time Daniel Kessler was transferred to federal custody, investigators already knew one thing for certain. Laura Bennett had not been killed because of a personal conflict. She had been eliminated because of what she discovered. And what she discovered threatened to collapse an entire corporate empire. Within 48 hours of her death, Forensic specialists from the Federal Bureau of Investigation and financial crimes analysts from the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission were embedded inside Riverside Tower. Every server was mirrored. Every executive email was archived. Every financial transaction from the previous 5 years was flagged for review. The company at the center of the storm was Helixon Biotech. Publicly, Helixon specialized in gene therapy research and rare disease treatment. Privately, it was bleeding money. Despite reporting record profits for 3 consecutive years, internal audits showed massive cash flow gaps. Research expenses were inflated. Vendor contracts were duplicated. Entire departments appeared to exist only on paper. Laura Bennett had been hired specifically to investigate these inconsistencies. Her job was supposed to be procedural. Instead, she found something criminal. 6 months before her death, Laura noticed a pattern in Helixon's acquisition strategy. The company repeatedly purchased small overseas laboratories at inflated prices. These labs were located in Estonia, Malta, Cyprus, and Panama. On paper, they conducted genetic research. In reality, most of them were shell entities. Money flowed into them. It never came back. By tracing international wire transfers, Laura reconstructed a hidden network of accounts controlled through offshore trusts and nominee directors. At the center of that network was a private investment firm registered in Luxembourg. That firm belonged to Daniel Kessler. He had never disclosed it. Under corporate governance rules, this omission alone was grounds for termination. But it was worse than that. The Luxembourg firm owned majority stakes in all the Shell laboratories, which meant Helixon was secretly paying itself through Daniel. It was a self-laundering system. Company money was being siphoned out, routed through foreign entities, and returned as consulting fees and research partnerships. Over 5 years, more than $400 million had disappeared this way. Laura discovered this on March 29th. She did not report it immediately. Instead, she started building a case. She knew what she was dealing with. Daniel Kessler was not just an executive. He was one of the architects of Helixon's public image. He had personal relationships with board members, senators, and major investors. If she accused him without airtight proof, she would be destroyed professionally. So she worked quietly. For 19 days, she cross-referenced wire records, internal ledgers, and third-party audits. She reconstructed hidden spreadsheets deleted from cloud backups. She obtained encrypted copies of transaction logs. By April 15th, she had assembled a complete financial map. It showed motive, it showed intent, and it showed conspiracy, because Daniel was not alone. At least 4 other executives were implicated. The chief operating officer approved fake vendor contracts. The head of procurement signed off on non-existent shipments. A regional director in Europe managed the shell companies. And Helixon's external auditing firm had ignored multiple red flags. This was organized fraud, not opportunistic theft. A structure, a system. Laura prepared a formal disclosure packet. It contained 67 pages of analysis, appendices, transaction charts, source documents, legal references. She stored it on an encrypted drive and kept a backup in a secure cloud vault. On April 16th, she requested a private meeting with 3 independent board members. She marked the email urgent. She wrote one sentence: "I have evidence of systemic financial misconduct involving senior leadership that requires immediate review." That email went to Daniel Kessler within 3 minutes. He was copied automatically. That was his first warning. Internal server logs show that within 20 minutes of receiving the email, Daniel accessed Laura's shared workspace. He downloaded multiple files. He attempted to open her encrypted archive. He failed. He then contacted Helixon's chief information officer. The call lasted 11 minutes. Within an hour, Laura's remote access permissions were quietly downgraded. She noticed. She documented it. She added it to her report. By that evening, Daniel understood something crucial. Laura was not bluffing. She had proof, and she was going to present it. The scheduled meeting for April 17th was not symbolic. It was procedural. Once those documents entered the board's compliance record, federal disclosure would become mandatory. Stock trading would be frozen. Executives would be suspended. Criminal investigations would begin automatically. Daniel's financial network would be exposed. He would lose everything: wealth, reputation, freedom. He had approximately 24 hours to stop that from happening. Phone records show that on the night of April 16th, Daniel made 7 calls between 10:30 and 2:15 in the morning. 1 to the procurement chief, 1 to the European director, 1 to his attorney, 2 to an unregistered prepaid phone, 3 to an overseas number in Malta. That Malta number belonged to a chemical supplier specializing in laboratory reagents. Through an intermediary, Daniel had purchased the neuromuscular agent 3 months earlier. He claimed it was for experimental testing. It was never registered with Helixson's compliance department. It was illegal for him to possess. He kept it in a refrigerated case inside a locked cabinet in his private office bathroom. Investigators would later find the empty vial. He also purchased the injector device online through a medical equipment reseller in Singapore. It arrived disguised as a novelty pen. Payment was made through cryptocurrency, routed through 4 wallets, all traced later. By dawn on April 17th, Daniel had made his decision. This was not a crime of rage, it was logistics. He needed 3 things: a private moment, a controlled environment, and a plausible narrative. The elevator provided all 3, but he still needed Laura to be there. He could not force her, so he manipulated her schedule. At 8:15 in the morning, Daniel sent Laura a message asking her to review a minor compliance amendment before the board meeting. He framed it as urgent. He attached a corrupted file. When Laura tried to open it, it failed. She replied. He suggested she print a hard copy from the lobby business center. That required going downstairs. That placed her near the elevator bank. It was deliberate. Building access logs confirmed that Daniel used the stairwell instead of the elevator to reach the lobby. He did not want to be seen waiting. He wanted the encounter to appear coincidental. At 3:38 in the afternoon, he positioned himself near the column. At 3:42, Laura approached. Everything after that followed his plan. Except one thing. Laura had already secured her evidence. At 11:20 in the morning, she uploaded her encrypted packet to an external legal archive operated by her former law firm. She scheduled it for automatic release if she failed to log in by midnight. Daniel did not know this. When he killed her, he believed he was erasing the only copy. He was wrong. At 12:01 on April 18th, the archive released the files. They were sent simultaneously to the Helixson Board, the Securities and Exchange Commission, and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. By sunrise, trading in Helixson stock was suspended. By noon, 4 executives were under federal indictment. By evening, Daniel Kessler was no longer just a murder suspect. He was the central figure in one of the largest corporate fraud cases in Illinois history. But he was still free. He had been released on temporary bail pending toxicology confirmation, and he knew what was coming next. Which brings us to part 3, the manhunt. Because when the warrants were finally issued, Daniel Kessler was already gone. By the time federal prosecutors signed the arrest warrant for Daniel Kessler, he had already completed the final phase of his plan: disappearance. At 6:12 in the morning on April 19th, security cameras at O'Hare International Airport recorded Daniel entering Terminal 3 with a single carry-on bag. He was wearing a baseball cap and glasses. No checked luggage, no visible electronics, no briefcase. He was supposed to surrender his passport that afternoon. He did not. Instead, he boarded a domestic flight to Phoenix under his real name. That detail confused investigators later. Criminals usually flee using fake identities. Daniel did not. He was not running yet. He was repositioning. At 9:57 in the morning, he landed at Phoenix Sky Harbor International Airport. He rented a car using a corporate account still active at Helixon. Then he drove south for 4 hours. Cell tower pings tracked his phone along Interstate 10, through Casa Grande, past Tucson, toward the Mexican border. At 2:18 in the afternoon, his phone went offline. Permanently. He had removed the battery. Border cameras later captured his vehicle crossing into Nogales. He abandoned it 3 miles inside Mexico. From there, he vanished. Within 24 hours, the Federal Bureau of Investigation activated a multi-state fugitive task force. His face appeared on every major network. His name circulated through Interpol channels. Financial institutions froze 43 accounts connected to him. None contained more than minor balances. The real money was gone. Investigators soon learned why. 6 months earlier, Daniel had begun converting large sums into physical assets: gold bars, diamonds, rare coins, all purchased through private dealers in Nevada and New Mexico. Most transactions were completed in person. No cameras, no receipts. Those assets were never recovered. But the first real break did not come from money. It came from habit. Daniel Kessler had a routine. For 20 years, he ran every morning, 5 kilometers, no matter where he was. Hotels, resorts, apartments. He logged every run on a fitness app. He stopped using it after April 17th. But he forgot one thing. The app synchronized automatically when connected to public networks. 3 weeks after his disappearance, analysts noticed a dormant account briefly activate in southern Chile. The connection lasted 40 seconds, long enough to upload GPS metadata. It placed Daniel near the outskirts of Puerto Varas, a small city near Lake Lanquihu. Remote, quiet, popular with expatriates. Agents alerted Chilean authorities. Surveillance began quietly. Hotels were checked. Short-term rentals were reviewed. Hospitals were monitored. Nothing. Then, a local bank flagged a transaction. A man using a U.S. passport attempted to open a safety deposit box using forged residency papers. The photograph matched Daniel with altered hair and a beard. The bank manager stalled him. Police were notified. By the time officers arrived, he was gone. But they found something in the booth. A folded piece of paper. Coordinates, numbers. They corresponded to a rural cabin north of the city, hidden in forested terrain, accessible only by dirt road. On May 27th, Chilean special police surrounded the cabin at dawn. No lights, no vehicles, no response. They breached the door. Inside, they found supplies for long-term isolation: canned food, water filters, medical kits, cash in 3 currencies, and a laptop. The laptop was encrypted, but investigators recovered fragments, draft emails, audio recordings, personal notes. They revealed Daniel's psychological state after the murder. He did not express guilt. He expressed frustration. He believed Laura had forced his hand. He described her as an existential threat. He wrote, "She chose destruction. I chose survival." The notes also revealed something else. He was not finished. He believed other executives would eventually cooperate with prosecutors. He planned to retaliate. Names were listed, addresses, schedules, potential targets. This transformed the manhunt into a race. Daniel was no longer just a fugitive. He was an active threat. For 2 months, sightings came in from across South America, Argentina, Peru, Colombia. Most were false. One was not. In late July, a hotel clerk in Medellin reported a guest who paid exclusively in gold coins. He refused housekeeping. He avoided cameras. He jogged at dawn. Surveillance confirmed his identity. A joint operation between Colombian police and U.S. Marshals was authorized. On August 3rd, officers moved in. They waited until he left his room. He exited at 5:52 in the morning wearing running gear. As he entered the stairwell, officers blocked both ends. He stopped. He raised his hands. He did not resist. When they asked him why he ran, he gave one answer. Because stopping meant admitting I lost. Extradition proceedings lasted 6 months. Daniel fought them aggressively. He filed motions. He appealed rulings. He claimed political persecution. Every petition failed. In February of the following year, he was returned to the United States. He was transported directly to the Metropolitan Correctional Center, Chicago. The trial began 9 months later. Prosecutors presented 3 cases in one: murder, financial fraud, conspiracy. Over 200 witnesses testified. Thousands of documents were entered into evidence. The elevator footage was played 12 times. Jurors were given breaks after each viewing. Daniel never looked away. Laura Bennett's parents attended every session. They never sat together. They did not speak. They held photographs of their daughter. On the 47th day, the jury returned its verdict. Guilty on all counts. Daniel Kessler was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole, plus 87 years for financial crimes. He will never leave prison. Helixon Biotech collapsed within 14 months. Assets were liquidated. Research programs were canceled. Over 3,000 employees lost their jobs. 4 executives received prison sentences ranging from 12 to 30 years. The auditing firm paid the largest settlement in Illinois history. Laura Bennett's disclosure became mandatory reading in corporate compliance programs nationwide. New regulations were introduced. Whistleblower protections were expanded. Automatic data escrow systems became standard. These changes exist because she planned ahead, because she assumed risk, because she refused to stay silent. In her apartment, investigators found a notebook. On the first page, she had written one sentence. "If something happens to me, it was not an accident." She was right. And the elevator where she died is still in service. People ride it every day. They check their phones. They stare at the doors. They stand where she stood. Most of them have no idea what happened there. That is how easily violence hides inside routine. One closed space, 4 minutes, one decision, and a life erased. She was the only one to go in with him. Only one person walked out. And the truth followed him across continents until there was nowhere left to run. A hallway security camera mounted above the lobby doors captures a woman stepping inside at 6:42 in the evening on Thursday, February 7th, 2026. Her eyes fixed on her phone. She does not notice the man behind her. She does not realize that he has already followed her for 9 blocks. What happened next shocked everyone. Because 43 seconds after she crossed that threshold, she disappeared, and no one ever saw her alive again. Her name was Natalia Moroz, 28 years old. She worked as an accounting assistant at a logistics company on Wyszynskiego Street in eastern Krakow. She lived alone on the 5th floor of an apartment building built in the 1980s. On Thursday, February 7th, she clocked out at 5:35 in the afternoon. Nothing unusual, nothing urgent. She left the office building at 5:38. Across the street, a man was standing near a bus stop bench. Hood up, hands in pockets. He had been there for nearly 20 minutes. His name was Marek Zielinski. No one knew that yet. Security footage from a pharmacy camera shows Natalia walking past him at 5:41. She does not look up. She does not see his eyes follow her. 7 seconds later, he starts walking, always about 15 to 20 meters behind. At 5:47, Natalia enters a small grocery store on Lipowa Street. He does not buy anything. When she exits, he follows again. This continues for 23 minutes, through 3 intersections, past 2 tram stops, along a poorly lit pedestrian path behind an abandoned warehouse. Marek behind her. Never close enough to seem suspicious, never far enough to lose her. At 6:22, she turns onto Sadowa Avenue, the street where she lives. This is the first time she slows down. At 6:28, she enters the building courtyard. The front entrance is glass, automatic, secured by magnetic lock. Residents use key cards. Visitors must wait to be let in. She steps inside, and without hesitation, Marek slips in behind her before it closes. This is the moment investigators will replay more than any other, frame by frame. Because Natalia never turns around. She never checks, she never notices. At 6:29 and 40 seconds, she stops near the elevator panel. She presses the button. While she waits, she scrolls through her phone. Behind her, Marek stands 3 meters away. Her phone. Hands still in pockets, head slightly down. Natalia steps in first. Marek follows. This is the last confirmed image of her alive. The elevator ascends. It stops on the 5th floor at 6:32. The hallway camera on that floor records Natalia exiting first. Marek follows 2 seconds later. They walk in opposite directions for 4 steps. Then something changes. Natalia slows. She turns her head. Her body language shifts. Her shoulders tense. Investigators believe this is when she realizes she is not alone. No sound is recorded. At 6:32 and 30 seconds, they disappear into stairwell B. That stairwell has no camera, no lighting sensor, no emergency button, just concrete steps and metal railings. At 6:33, a neighbor on the 3rd floor hears something, a muffled thud, a short scream, then nothing. She assumes it is someone arguing on the phone. She closes her door. At 7:45, Natalia's mother calls her. No answer. At 8:30, she calls again. No answer. At 9:15, she messages her. No reply. At 10:40, she contacts Natalia's friend. By midnight, they file a missing person report. At 6:32 in the evening, a young woman walked into her own building. At 6:33, she vanished. No witnesses intervened. No alarms sounded. No doors were forced. No blood was found in the hallway, and the man who followed her inside had planned every step. But at that moment, no one knew that yet. Because to the police, this looked simple. A woman did not come home. A phone went silent. And somewhere in a quiet apartment building, something terrible had just begun. By the morning of Friday, February 8, 2026, Natalia Moraz had been missing for less than 12 hours. But investigators from the Krakow Metropolitan Police already understood that this was not a routine disappearance. Her phone was inactive. Her bank card had not been used. Her apartment showed no signs of entry. Her bed had not been slept in. Her groceries were still lying on the 5th floor hallway where they had fallen the night before. Nothing suggested that she had left voluntarily. Detectives began with the building. They collected footage from every functioning camera, starting with the courtyard, moving through the lobby, the elevator, and finally the 5th floor corridor. By noon, they had reconstructed her final 30 minutes, almost minute by minute. They saw her enter. They saw the unknown man follow. They saw them enter the stairwell together. They saw her never come back out. What they did not see was where he took her. Stairwell B connected 5 residential floors to an underground storage level and a maintenance corridor that led to the parking garage. That lower level had no cameras. It had not been renovated in more than 20 years. Several light fixtures were broken. Several doors did not lock properly. It was the kind of place no one thought about. Until now. Search teams swept the stairwell and basement for 8 hours. They found no blood, no torn clothing, no phone, no personal items belonging to Natalia. The only thing recovered was one small silver earring wedged between 2 concrete steps on the lower landing. Her mother confirmed later that Natalia had been wearing that pair. Landing. By Friday evening, the case was reclassified from missing person to suspected abduction. At the same time, another team focused on the man in the hoodie. They enlarged every available frame. They adjusted contrast. They isolated his walk, posture, and facial structure. They tracked his movement backward through the city. It took 6 hours to identify his path. He had appeared on camera at 5:15 near Noah Street, standing beside a closed kiosk. He remained there until Natalia passed by. He did not interact with anyone. He did not use his phone. He did not enter any shop. He was waiting. This changed everything, because it meant Natalia was not chosen randomly inside the building. She had been selected before she ever knew she was in danger. Detectives requested mobile network data for all devices that had moved alongside Natalia's phone during her final commute. One signal appeared repeatedly within close proximity. A prepaid phone registered under no name. It had activated at 4:30 that afternoon, near her workplace. It had deactivated at 7:10 that night, near the industrial zone outside the city. That phone became the investigation's priority. Meanwhile, officers canvassed the neighborhood. They spoke to shop owners, security guards, tram drivers, and residents. One bakery employee remembered seeing a man watching Natalia through the window while she paid. A bus driver recalled someone following her but never boarding. A cleaner at her office building mentioned a man who had stood near the exit several times that week. This was not his first attempt. When detectives pulled workplace records, they discovered that Natalia had changed her schedule 3 weeks earlier. She had started leaving 15 minutes later to avoid rush hour. Her routine had shifted, and someone had noticed. Her colleagues were questioned in depth. No conflicts, no secret relationships, no financial problems, no signs of planning to disappear. Relationships. Her browser history showed apartment listings for a larger place. Her calendar contained notes about a possible promotion. She was planning a future. She was not preparing to vanish. On Saturday, February 9th, investigators obtained warrants to analyze citywide transit and surveillance systems. They expanded the timeline backward by 30 days. That was when the pattern emerged. Marek Zielinski appeared again and again. On January 17th, he was filmed standing outside Natalia's office building for 40 minutes. On January 24th, he followed her into the same grocery store. On February 1st, he waited near her bus stop for nearly an hour. On February 5th, he walked behind her for 4 blocks before turning away. Each time he kept the same distance. Each time he left when she entered a crowded area. Each time he avoided cameras as much as possible. This was not coincidence. This was surveillance. Police databases soon matched his face to a prior record. Marek Zielinski, age 34. Unemployed. Former warehouse worker. Dismissed from 2 jobs for aggressive behavior. 1 restraining order filed by a former girlfriend in 2023. No convictions. No active warrants. Last registered address. A rented room in Nowa Huta district. Officers went there on Sunday morning. The landlord said Marek had moved out 2 weeks earlier. No forwarding address. No explanation. He had paid cash. He had packed quickly. His room was empty except for dust marks where furniture had been. But a neighbor mentioned something important. Marek had begun leaving late at night, returning before dawn, carrying a backpack, sometimes with stains on his shoes. Police searched dumpsters in the area. In one container they found plastic gloves, zip ties, and packaging from duct tape. DNA testing later connected those items to Marek. By Monday, February 11th, prosecutors approved electronic surveillance requests. Financial records were pulled. Approved internet activity was analyzed. Purchase histories were examined. Marek had bought sedatives online 3 months earlier. He had ordered industrial cleaning chemicals. He had rented a storage unit outside the city under a false name. He had searched phrases such as soundproof basement, subway tunnels Krakow, and abandoned factories map. This was not impulse. This was preparation. Investigators also learned that Marek had been dismissed from his warehouse job after repeatedly approaching female employees and refusing to stop. One woman had filed a complaint stating that he followed her home twice. The company had terminated him quietly. No police report had been filed. No warning had been issued. No one had connected the dots. During questioning, his former girlfriend described escalating control, obsession, and paranoia. He believed women owed him attention. He kept notebooks filled with names and schedules. Those notebooks were never recovered. On February 12th, police located the storage unit. Inside, they found restraints, plastic sheets, cleaning supplies, food rations, bottled water, and a mattress. They also found strands of hair consistent with Natalia's DNA. At that moment, the case officially became a homicide investigation. But her body was still missing. And the man who had followed her home was still free. What investigators now understood was this. Marek had watched Natalia for weeks. He had learned her habits. He had memorized her schedule. He had chosen a building with weak security. He had waited for the right night. He had used her own door to gain access. He had used the stairwell to avoid cameras. He had prepared a secondary location. He had brought tools. He had brought supplies. He had brought time. This was not a crime of opportunity. This was a planned abduction. And somewhere outside the city, he was still moving, still hiding, still deciding what to do next. While the clock kept running, and Natalia's family kept waiting. By Tuesday, February 12, 2026, the disappearance of Natalia Moroz had become the most closely watched criminal investigation in southern Poland in more than a decade. Her photograph was on every major news channel. Her face appeared on tram screens, social media banners, and missing person posters taped to shop windows. Her mother gave daily interviews. Her co-workers organized candlelight vigils outside the office building. And still, there was no sign of her. But investigators now had something they did not have before: a direction. Analysis of traffic cameras near the storage facility showed a dark gray Opel Astra leaving the area at 3:14 in the morning on February 8th. The vehicle had no front license plate. The rear plate was partially obscured by mud. One camera, positioned near a toll road entrance, captured a clearer image. The plate belonged to Marek Zielinski. That car became the center of the search. Automatic recognition systems traced its movement eastward, away from Kraków, toward a sparsely populated industrial corridor near Tarnów. The car appeared on cameras 4 more times, before disappearing completely near an abandoned chemical plant, closed in 2019. That location had been flagged earlier in Marek's online searches. Now it became the priority. On February 13th, police established a perimeter around the area. Drones were deployed. Thermal imaging teams were brought in. Search dogs were flown from Warsaw. The plant covered more than 12 hectares of crumbling buildings, underground tunnels, and storage silos. It was the kind of place someone could hide for months. Search teams entered in rotating shifts. They moved slowly. Every room was treated as a potential trap. On the second day of the operation, officers discovered fresh tire tracks leading behind a collapsed warehouse. Nearby, they found food wrappers and empty water bottles. The dates on the packaging were recent. Someone was still there. At dawn on February 15th, a drone detected heat signatures inside a sealed processing hall. 3 figures appeared on the screen. 2 were stationary. 1 was moving. Armed tactical units were deployed immediately. They surrounded the building. Loudspeakers were activated. Marek was ordered to surrender. There was no response. After 40 minutes, officers breached the entrance. Inside, they found Natalia. She was lying on a makeshift mattress behind plastic sheeting. She had been restrained. She had been sedated. She had been alive for 6 days after her abduction. She did not survive. Her injuries were consistent with prolonged captivity and repeated abuse. Medical examiners later confirmed that she died less than 12 hours before police arrived. Marek was found in an adjacent room. He was sitting against a wall. He was holding his phone. He did not resist. He did not speak. He allowed himself to be handcuffed without reaction. During interrogation, he initially refused to cooperate. He stared at the table. He avoided eye contact. He requested no lawyer. He offered no explanation. After 9 hours, he began talking. He described noticing Natalia months earlier at a tram stop. He said she looked different. He said she seemed quiet. He said he believed she was meant for him. He admitted to following her. He admitted to planning the abduction. He admitted to preparing the facility. He denied responsibility for her death. He claimed it was an accident. Investigators confronted him with medical evidence. He stopped speaking. Digital forensic experts later recovered deleted files from his phone and laptop. They found detailed schedules, maps, photos taken without her knowledge, notes describing routes, entrances, and camera blind spots. One document was titled simply Plan. It had been created 3 months earlier. The trial began in October 2026. It lasted 11 weeks. In October, prosecutors presented surveillance footage, DNA evidence, digital records, and testimony from experts and witnesses. Natalia's mother attended every session. She never looked at Marek. When the verdict was read, he showed no reaction. He was convicted of aggravated kidnapping, sexual assault, and premeditated murder. He received life imprisonment without parole. After the trial, several institutions were forced to answer difficult questions. Why had prior complaints been ignored? Why had restraining orders not been monitored? Why had workplace reports never reached law enforcement? Why had building security systems remained outdated? New regulations were introduced. Residential complexes were required to upgrade cameras. Stairwells had to be monitored. Keycard systems were redesigned. Emergency alert buttons were installed. These changes were necessary. But they came too late for Natalia. Her apartment was cleared 3 months later. Her desk at work remained empty. Her mother keeps her phone active. She says she cannot bring herself to disconnect the number, because it feels like erasing the last link. Natalia did nothing wrong. She followed her routine. She trusted her environment. She walked into her own building. She assumed she was safe. And for most people, that assumption is correct. But this case showed how easily routine can be studied, how predictability can be weaponized, how silence can hide danger. One man followed. One door opened. One moment passed. And a life ended. That is how this story ends. Not with mystery, not with unanswered questions, but with a reminder. Awareness is not paranoia. Caution is not weakness. And safety should never be taken for granted. A security camera mounted above the entrance to a regional hospital captured something that seemed routine at first. A young woman crossed the parking lot with a canvas bag over one shoulder, glancing briefly toward the building she had just left. The vehicle that rolled slowly into frame had no markings, no company logo, nothing to make it stand out. The person stepping toward the passenger door had no idea what was about to happen next. What followed shocked everyone. The footage came from St. Bridget Medical Center, a mid-sized hospital located outside the city of Norfield. On the evening of October 23, 2021, staff members rotated shifts as usual. At approximately 6:45 in the evening, Lillian Hart, a 28-year-old respiratory therapist, ended her 12-hour shift and exited through the staff entrance on the east side of the building. The parking lot was moderately busy, with nurses arriving for the night rotation and families visiting relatives. According to hospital access logs, Lillian badged out at 6:42. 3 minutes later, a camera positioned above the emergency department captured her walking toward the far corner of the lot, where employee vehicles were typically parked. Lillian had worked at St. Bridget for nearly 4 years and followed the same routine after every shift. Colleagues later confirmed that she usually called her sister during the walk to her car. That evening, no call was made. At 6:47, the unmarked van entered the frame from the southern access road. It slowed near the staff parking section and paused several spaces away from where Lillian was standing. The van's headlights remained on, but no turn signals were used. Lillian approached the passenger side. There was no visible struggle in the footage, no sudden movements. After a brief exchange through the open window, the passenger door opened. Lillian stepped inside. The door closed. The van reversed carefully and exited the lot. When Lillian failed to return home that night, her sister, Marissa Hart, initially assumed overtime had been required. Around 9:15 in the evening, Marissa sent a text message asking if everything was all right. The message remained unread. By 10:30, repeated calls went directly to voicemail. At 11:20, Marissa drove to St. Bridget Medical Center to check the parking lot. Lillian's sedan remained in its usual spot. Hospital security reviewed entry and exit logs and confirmed that Lillian had left the building shortly before 7. When Marissa insisted that something was wrong, security personnel examined the surveillance footage from the east lot. The moment Lillian entered the van stood out immediately. There were no prior records of the vehicle in hospital databases, and the license plate was partially obscured by glare from the headlights. At 12:45 in the morning, Norfield Police Department was contacted. Officers arrived shortly after 1 o'clock. Initially, investigators treated the situation as a possible voluntary departure, noting the absence of visible force. However, Marissa emphasized that Lillian had plans the following morning and would not leave without informing family. Detectives documented the timeline and requested full copies of hospital surveillance recordings from all exterior cameras. By sunrise, the case had shifted from a missing adult report to a suspicious disappearance. Officers canvassed the area surrounding the hospital, interviewing staff who had worked the evening shift. Several nurses remembered seeing a dark-colored van circulating slowly through the lot earlier in the week. None could provide a plate number or identify the driver. Digital forensics teams accessed Lillian's phone records. The device last connected to a cell tower approximately 1 mile south of St. Brigid at 7:12 in the evening. After that point, the signal ceased. There were no outgoing calls or messages. Her bank accounts showed no activity following her shift. Her apartment remained undisturbed, with personal belongings and identification left behind. Local news outlets reported the disappearance within 24 hours. Surveillance stills of the van were released to the public. The vehicle appeared to be a mid-sized cargo model with tinted rear windows and no company branding. Law enforcement asked residents to check private security systems for any matching vehicle traveling near the hospital around the time Lillian vanished. 2 days later, a gas station attendant located along Ridgeway Avenue contacted police after recognizing the van from televised images. According to surveillance footage from the station, a similar vehicle had stopped for fuel at approximately 7:25 in the evening on the night of the disappearance. The driver paid in cash and kept a hooded sweatshirt pulled low over the face. Cameras did not capture a clear image. Investigators traced the route between St. Brigid and the gas station, reviewing traffic cameras along the corridor. Several recordings confirmed a van matching the description traveling southbound. However, once it reached the industrial district near the river, the trail went cold. That area lacked functioning municipal cameras due to ongoing construction. Public concern intensified as days passed without contact. Volunteer search groups organized coordinated efforts across wooded areas bordering the riverbank. Police divers examined sections of the waterway but found no vehicle submerged. Detectives expanded their inquiry to include former patients, disgruntled employees, and individuals with prior conflicts involving hospital staff. 1 week after Lillian disappeared, investigators held a press conference announcing the formation of a specialized task force. Authorities clarified that while no evidence of physical coercion was visible in the initial footage, the circumstances strongly suggested abduction. The calm interaction at the passenger door now appeared calculated rather than spontaneous. Forensic analysts enhanced the hospital video, focusing on subtle details. Lillian's posture seemed tense as she leaned toward the open window. The van's interior remained dark, concealing the driver's features. The rear cargo section appeared empty, but glare and low resolution limited clarity. Detectives believed that whoever operated the vehicle had planned the encounter carefully, selecting a location with predictable routines and limited oversight. As the second week began, no ransom demand surfaced. No personal conflict emerged from interviews with friends and co-workers. Lillian had no known enemies and maintained a consistent schedule. The absence of motive deepened the mystery. The only confirmed fact remained that at 6:47 in the evening, a young medical professional entered an unmarked van in a hospital parking lot and was never seen again. The question confronting investigators was no longer whether a crime had occurred. It was who had orchestrated it, and how long the planning had been underway. Part 2. Planning and Motive. The deeper investigators examined Lillian Hart's routines, the more deliberate the disappearance appeared. Detectives reconstructed her weekly schedule, mapping each shift, commute, and errand. St. Brigid Medical Center rotated respiratory therapists between day and evening assignments every 2 weeks. On the night Lillian vanished, the shift change had been posted only 5 days earlier. Whoever intercepted her in the parking lot had either obtained that information quickly or had been monitoring her movements over a longer period. Detective Aaron Velasquez led the task force assigned to the case. Rather than focusing immediately on Lillian's personal life, Velasquez concentrated on the environment surrounding the hospital. He ordered a review of all security complaints filed during the previous 3 months. Records revealed several reports of a dark cargo van idling near the staff entrance during late afternoon hours. None had been deemed suspicious at the time. Investigators canvassed nearby businesses for additional footage. A dental clinic located across the street provided video showing a similar van parked along the curb on 3 separate dates earlier that month. Each time, the vehicle remained for approximately 20 minutes before departing. The pattern suggested surveillance rather than coincidence. Attention shifted to access control within St. Brigid. Human Resources confirmed that employee shift schedules were stored on an internal server protected by password credentials. However, several contractors, including information technology vendors, had temporary access to portions of the network. Logs indicated that one external account had downloaded staff rosters 2 days before the disappearance. That account belonged to Westbridge Systems, a company contracted to update the hospital's billing software. Among Westbridge employees assigned to the project was a 34-year-old technician named Conrad Hale. Hale had been present on site intermittently for 3 weeks before October 23rd. He possessed a badge granting limited after-hours entry to administrative offices. When questioned, Hale stated that his downloads were routine and unrelated to any individual employee. He denied knowing Lillian Hart. Records showed no direct communication between them. However, cell tower data placed Hale's personal phone within the same industrial district south of the hospital on the evening in question. Velasquez authorized a deeper background investigation. Hale had relocated to Norfield the previous year after resigning from a similar position in another state. There were no violent offenses on record, but 2 former employers described abrupt departures following allegations of inappropriate behavior toward female colleagues. No charges had been filed. Meanwhile, forensic specialists examined the hospital footage frame by frame. A faint reflection in the van's side mirror revealed part of the driver's forearm. On that arm appeared a distinctive geometric tattoo. Detectives circulated the image internally, comparing it against known offenders with similar markings. No immediate match surfaced. As public pressure mounted, Lillian's family released additional details about her life. She had recently testified in a workplace harassment complaint involving a former patient who had been removed from the facility for aggressive conduct. That individual, Raymond Pike, had sent multiple unsolicited messages to hospital staff before being barred from entry. Pike became a person of interest. Police interviewed Pike at his residence. He admitted resentment toward hospital administration, but denied any involvement in the disappearance. Surveillance from a grocery store placed Pike miles away at the time Lillian entered the van. While investigators did not fully eliminate him, attention returned to individuals with both technical knowledge and access to scheduling data. Financial analysis uncovered an unusual transaction linked to Conrad Hale. 2 weeks before the disappearance, Hale purchased a used cargo van from a private seller in a neighboring county. The bill of sale described the vehicle as dark blue, manufactured 7 years earlier. Hale registered the van under a limited liability company formed shortly after his arrival in Norfield. When confronted with this information, Hale claimed the van was intended for a side business transporting computer equipment. He asserted that it had been parked at his residence on the evening of October 23rd. Detectives obtained a warrant to search the property. Inside the garage, investigators found no van. Hale stated that it had been sold days earlier to an unknown buyer. No documentation supported that claim. Neighbors reported seeing a dark cargo vehicle at the residence as recently as the previous weekend. Forensic teams seized Hale's computer equipment. Data recovery specialists discovered encrypted files containing hospital floor maps and employee photographs extracted from internal directories. Among the images was Lillian Hart's staff identification photo. Velasquez considered the possibility that Hale had fixated on a specific employee. However, there was still no direct evidence placing him inside the van captured on hospital cameras. The tattoo reflection remained the most tangible clue. A search warrant permitted examination of Hale's arms. The geometric tattoo visible on his right forearm closely resembled the blurred image from the mirror reflection. The case began to shift from an unexplained disappearance to a targeted abduction. Investigators theorized that Hale had studied staff schedules, identified Lillian's consistent parking location, and selected an evening shift change to minimize attention. The absence of visible force suggested that he may have posed as someone with legitimate business at the hospital. Yet motive remained uncertain. There was no ransom communication, no indication of financial gain. Hale's browsing history, however, revealed extensive searches related to identity change, remote properties, and cross-border travel routes. Simultaneously, authorities traced the van's likely path after leaving the industrial district. Traffic cameras along a rural highway 30 miles south captured a dark cargo vehicle traveling toward an abandoned manufacturing complex. The facility had been closed for over a decade and contained multiple warehouse structures shielded from main roads. Search warrants were prepared, but without concrete proof tying Hale to the specific route on that night. Legal thresholds slowed immediate action. Detectives continued gathering corroborating evidence while maintaining surveillance on Hale's movements. 3 weeks after the disappearance, a breakthrough emerged. A delivery driver reported nearly colliding with a dark cargo van exiting the abandoned manufacturing complex late at night. The driver recalled a partial license plate sequence that matched the registration tied to Hale's limited liability company. With this information, Velasquez secured judicial authorization to search the complex. What investigators would find inside those warehouse walls would determine whether Lillian Hart was still alive, or whether the planning had been designed to ensure that no trace of her would ever surface again. Part 3. The Manhunt. Before dawn on November 14th, a coordinated team of Norfield police officers and state investigators surrounded the abandoned manufacturing complex. Entry teams moved systematically through the main warehouse structures, documenting each room. In one corner of the largest building, officers located tire impressions consistent with a mid-sized cargo van. Nearby, they discovered disposable gloves, plastic restraints, and food packaging dated within the previous week. A locked interior office required forced entry. Inside, investigators found a folding chair, a portable generator, and a cellular signal jammer. There was no sign of Lillian Hart. However, forensic technicians collected fibers and hair samples for analysis. While the search unfolded, surveillance units positioned near Conrad Hale's residence observed unusual activity. Hale loaded several duffel bags into a sedan, registered under a different corporate name, and departed abruptly. When officers attempted a traffic stop, Hale accelerated, initiating a pursuit along county roads. The chase extended for nearly 20 miles before Hale abandoned the vehicle near a wooded area and fled on foot. A perimeter was established with assistance from state troopers and aerial support. After several hours, Hale was located hiding beneath dense brush and taken into custody. During interrogation, Hale initially denied any knowledge of Lillian's whereabouts. However, forensic results from the warehouse linked fibers found on the folding chair to material from Lillian's hospital-issued jacket. Additionally, trace soil samples from the van's tires matched sediment from the complex's interior flooring. Confronted with mounting evidence, Hale admitted to orchestrating the encounter at St. Bridget Medical Center. He claimed that he had approached Lillian under the pretense of discussing a billing error related to patient records. According to his statement, Lillian entered the van voluntarily, believing the conversation would be brief. Hale described transporting her to the abandoned complex, where restraints were used to prevent escape. He asserted that the plan involved relocating both himself and Lillian to a remote property purchased under a shell company. Investigators determined that the property was located several states away and had been acquired 2 months before the disappearance. Despite these admissions, Hale refused to disclose Lillian's current location. Search teams intensified efforts at the warehouse and surrounding land. Cadaver dogs alerted near a shallow trench behind the main structure. Excavation uncovered disturbed soil, but no remains. Detectives concluded that Hale had moved the victim after the initial confinement. Financial tracking revealed a second property rental under Hale's alias in a rural county across state lines. A warrant was executed in cooperation with federal authorities. Inside the small cabin, officers found personal items belonging to Lillian, including her identification badge and canvas bag seen in the hospital footage. There was no sign of Lillian herself. Further digital analysis of Hale's devices uncovered encrypted communications with an unidentified accomplice. Messages referenced transfer completed and route secured. Investigators expanded the manhunt to locate this potential collaborator. Surveillance footage from a highway toll plaza captured Hale's cargo van following a pickup truck registered to a man named Douglas Marin, a former co-worker from Hale's previous employment. Marin was apprehended within 48 hours. During questioning, Marin admitted to assisting in transporting Lillian from the warehouse to an undisclosed location, but claimed he never learned her final destination. He described meeting Hale through online forums focused on survivalist communities and anti-government ideology. Authorities searched additional properties tied to both men. Months passed without locating Lillian Hart. Prosecutors filed kidnapping and conspiracy charges against Hale and Marin, citing overwhelming physical and digital evidence. In court, surveillance footage from the hospital parking lot was presented as the starting point of a meticulously planned abduction. The calm exchange at the passenger door, once perceived as voluntary, was reframed as calculated deception supported by weeks of surveillance and data collection. Despite extensive investigation, Lillian's body was never recovered. Hale was convicted and sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Marin received a lengthy sentence for aiding and abetting the crime. The unmarked van was eventually located submerged in a quarry several counties away, deliberately stripped of identifying components. Forensic examination confirmed traces of Lillian's DNA inside the cargo area. Years later, the footage from St. Bridget Medical Center remains central to the case. It captures the final confirmed moment of Lillian Hart's life in public view. A routine walk across a hospital parking lot, a brief exchange at a passenger door, and a departure that no one questioned until it was too late. The investigation revealed planning, coordination, and deliberate concealment. But it never delivered the one answer her family continues to seek. Lillian Hart entered an unmarked van on an ordinary evening after work and disappeared forever, leaving behind a trail of evidence that exposed her captors, yet failed to bring her home. A doorbell camera on a neighbor's house captured something that seemed ordinary at first. The person on the screen had no idea what was about to happen next. What followed shocked everyone. On a quiet residential street in the eastern part of Brookfield, Oregon, a woman struggling with a large delivery paused at the front steps of her apartment building. A man walking past offered to help. She hesitated, then nodded. She stepped aside and let him inside. That short exchange, lasting less than half a minute, became the last confirmed image of Mara Klein alive. The footage came from a doorbell camera mounted on Unit 12, directly across from the building's main entrance. The timestamp read, Tuesday, September 17th, 2023, just after 2 in the afternoon. The video showed Mara arriving in her compact hatchback, parking near the curb, and opening the trunk. Inside was a single oversized cardboard box, nearly as wide as the trunk opening, sealed with heavy packing tape and marked with red, fragile labels on every side. Records later showed it contained professional lighting equipment she had ordered for a freelance photography contract scheduled to begin the following week. Mara was 28 years old. She lived alone in Unit 7 on the second floor. She worked as a part-time barista in the mornings and took private photography jobs in the afternoons and evenings. That Tuesday was her last scheduled shift at the cafe. She had already given notice. She planned to move to Seattle within 3 weeks after securing a full-time position with a media company. Friends later told investigators she saw that day as the beginning of her real career. On the footage, Mara struggled to lift the box from the trunk. She tried twice, failed, and leaned against the car to catch her breath. At that moment, a man appeared from the right side of the frame, walking along the sidewalk. He was wearing dark jeans, a gray hoodie, and a baseball cap pulled low over his forehead. He slowed when he noticed her difficulty. He spoke to her. The camera did not record audio, but his body language suggested a casual offer of help. He pointed toward the building entrance. Mara smiled briefly, shook her head once, then reconsidered. She stepped back and allowed him to take one side of the box. Together they carried it through the front door. The building's internal security cameras were outdated and partially functional. Only one camera in the hallway was working that day, and it recorded at a low frame rate. It showed Mara and the man entering the stairwell. He was carrying the front end of the box. She followed behind, holding the back. They disappeared up the stairs. No camera covered the second-floor hallway where her apartment was located. That was the last confirmed visual record of her. At 3 in the afternoon, Mara failed to appear for a scheduled video call with a client. At 4, her supervisor at the cafe sent a message reminding her to return her uniform and locker key. There was no response. At 6, her mother, Lillian Klein, called her phone. It rang unanswered. By 8 in the evening, concern turned into alarm. Mara had never missed a call from her mother. She had never gone more than a few hours without responding to friends. At 9:30, Lillian contacted the Brookfield Police Department to report her daughter missing. The initial response was routine. Officers checked local hospitals, reviewed recent phone activity, and visited Mara's apartment. When they knocked on Unit 7, no one answered. A neighbor from Unit 8 said she had not seen Mara since early afternoon. Another neighbor remembered seeing her with some guy and a big box earlier that day, but could not provide details. Officers contacted the property manager, who arrived with a master key shortly before midnight. Inside the apartment, they found no signs of forced entry and no visible struggle. The living room was neat. The kitchen sink contained a single coffee mug. Her laptop was closed on the desk. Her phone charger was plugged into the wall, but her phone was missing. Her wallet and keys were not found. The large package was also gone. At first, investigators assumed Mara had left voluntarily. She was planning to move. She had job prospects. There were no known threats or recent conflicts. Missing adult cases in Brookfield were typically resolved within a few days. Most involved misunderstandings, short trips, or relationship disputes. That assumption began to collapse within 48 hours. Her bank account showed no activity after Tuesday afternoon. Her transit card was unused. Her social media accounts were silent. No friends reported hearing from her. Her employer confirmed she never returned to collect her final paycheck. Her landlord reported that rent for the following month had not been paid, despite Mara always paying early. On Friday morning, detectives reviewed footage from nearby buildings. That was when they found the doorbell recording from Unit 12. The video had been automatically uploaded to a cloud server and saved for 30 days. The resident had not checked it until police requested access. For the first time, investigators saw the man. They enhanced the footage and stabilized the image. He appeared to be in his early 30s, approximately average height, with a lean build. His face was partially obscured by the cap, but several frames showed a narrow jawline and light stubble. No distinctive tattoos or scars were visible. His shoes were plain black sneakers without logos. He did not live in the building. Property records and tenant lists confirmed he was not a resident or registered guest. No one in the complex recognized him. No vehicle associated with him appeared on any nearby camera. The footage also revealed something else. After carrying the box inside, the man did not leave. At 2:36 in the afternoon, another camera across the street recorded him exiting the building alone. He was no longer carrying anything. He walked east, out of range, and was not seen again. Mara never came back out. Detectives returned to Unit 7 with a forensic team. This time they conducted a full search. In the bedroom closet, they found one suitcase partially packed with clothes. On the desk, they found a printed email confirming her upcoming contract. In the bathroom, her toothbrush and makeup were still arranged as usual. Nothing suggested she had planned to leave suddenly. In the kitchen trash, they found packaging foam and torn cardboard fragments matching the type used in her delivery. The box had been opened inside the apartment, but the contents were gone. Tracking numbers showed the package had been delivered that morning and signed for electronically by Mara herself. No shipping insurance claim had been filed. The equipment inside was valued at over $4,000. The case shifted from missing person to suspected abduction. On Sunday evening, divers searched the nearby river. Volunteers distributed flyers. Local news stations ran her photo during every broadcast. Tips poured in, most of them vague or unrelated. A man matching the description had been seen at a bus stop. Someone thought they recognized him at a gas station. None of it led anywhere. Then, on the 5th day, a maintenance worker made a discovery. Behind the building, near the dumpsters, there was a locked storage room used for discarded furniture. Inside, he noticed a damaged cardboard panel leaning against the wall. It had red, fragile labels identical to those on Mara's package. Police were called immediately. Forensic testing confirmed it was from her box. There were faint traces of blood on the inner surface. Not enough to indicate a violent struggle. Enough to prove she had been injured. By that evening, detectives knew they were no longer searching for a missing woman. They were searching for a crime scene that had already been cleaned, a suspect who had planned his exit, and a truth hidden behind a moment of ordinary kindness that lasted less than 30 seconds. And they had no idea yet how long he had been waiting for exactly that moment. By the time investigators confirmed that Mara Klein had not left voluntarily, the man from the doorbell footage had already been gone for nearly a week. No name, no address, no known connection, no vehicle. He had entered her life for less than 15 minutes and erased himself almost completely. That absence was not accidental. It was the first indication that what happened inside Unit 7 had not been spontaneous. Detectives began by reconstructing Mara's final week. They reviewed her messages, emails, work schedules, and financial records. Nothing suggested fear, conflict, or secret relationships. She had not been arguing with anyone. She had not been meeting strangers. She had not been involved in risky activities. Her life, by every measurable standard, was stable and predictable, which made her disappearance more alarming. Her routine rarely changed. On weekdays, she worked mornings at the cafe, returned home by noon, edited photos, and prepared for evening shoots. She ordered equipment only when a major contract was confirmed. That delivery on Tuesday was planned 2 weeks in advance. Shipping records showed the package was scheduled for arrival between noon and 3 in the afternoon. She had arranged to be home specifically for it. Someone else knew that. Phone records showed that 3 days before the delivery, Mara had received a brief call from an unknown number. It lasted less than 20 seconds. There was no voicemail. At the time, she did not mention it to anyone. Investigators initially assumed it was spam. Then they traced the number. It belonged to a prepaid phone purchased at a convenience store 15 miles away. The phone had been activated the same morning. It had only made 2 calls. One to Mara, one to a voicemail system. Then it was never used again. Security footage from the convenience store showed a man wearing a gray hoodie and baseball cap buying the phone with cash. The image quality was poor, but the posture, build, and clothing were consistent with the man from the doorbell video. This was the first confirmed sign of preparation. The second came from her email. 2 weeks before her disappearance, Mara had received a message from someone claiming to be an independent logistics contractor. He said he had seen her work online and was interested in collaborating on a future project. He asked basic questions about her schedule and equipment. She replied politely but briefly. She did not commit to anything. The conversation ended after 3 messages. The sender's account had been deleted 3 days later. Investigators recovered archived server data. The account had been created using a public library computer. The same library's cameras recorded a man matching the suspect's appearance, using that terminal on multiple occasions over the previous month. He had been watching her, not from a distance, from inside her digital life. Further analysis revealed that someone had viewed her public portfolio, her social profiles, and her booking calendar repeatedly over a 6-week period. The pattern was consistent. Every few days, usually late at night, the same IP addresses accessed her pages. All were traced to public networks, cafes, libraries, transit stations. He never logged in from the same place twice. He never used personal devices. He never left a consistent trail. Investigators now understood that the chance encounter with a helpful stranger was a performance. He had known her schedule. He had known the delivery window. He had known she would be alone. He had known she would be carrying something heavy. And he had prepared himself to appear at exactly the right moment. The next breakthrough came from building access logs. Although the apartment complex did not require key cards for entry, the laundry room and storage areas did. On the day of Mara's disappearance, an unknown access card had been used twice in the afternoon. Once at 2:20, once at 3:10. Neither time corresponded to any registered resident. The card had been cloned. Digital forensics showed it was copied from a tenant's card 2 weeks earlier, likely using a portable skimming device in the building's common area. Someone had been inside the complex before. More than once. Maintenance records confirmed that a man posing as a subcontractor had requested access to the building twice in August. He claimed to be inspecting fire alarms. He wore reflective gear and carried fake paperwork. No one questioned him. He was polite, efficient, unremarkable. Witnesses later identified that man as the same person from the footage. He had walked through every hallway. He had mapped every camera. He had learned which doors were blind spots. He had learned which apartments were isolated. Unit 7 was one of them. It was located at the end of the second-floor corridor, partially shielded by a structural column. No direct camera coverage, no neighboring doors within immediate hearing distance. It was the safest place in the building to commit a crime. And he knew it. Inside Mara's apartment, investigators found subtle disturbances that had not been noticed initially. A bookshelf slightly misaligned, a rug corner folded inward, a faint scrape near the bedroom doorway. These were signs of movement, not chaos. Controlled repositioning. There had been a struggle, but it had been brief. Toxicology tests on the coffee mug found in her sink revealed traces of a sedative compound commonly used in veterinary medicine. Colorless, odorless, fast-acting. It matched substances sold online without prescription. Shipping records showed several small packages delivered to a rented mailbox under a false name in the previous months. All originated from medical supply vendors. All contained related compounds. The mailbox had been rented using forged identification. The photo on the application matched the suspect. He had planned incapacitation, not confrontation. Investigators concluded that after helping her carry the box inside, he likely offered to place it in her living room. While she opened it, he prepared a drink, or he had prepared it beforehand. The timeline suggested she consumed it within minutes. Symptoms would have appeared quickly: dizziness, confusion, weakness, enough to prevent resistance, not enough to cause immediate unconsciousness. That mattered, because he wanted her alive. Evidence from her laptop showed that it had been accessed at 3:15 in the afternoon. Someone had attempted to disable cloud backups. Someone had deleted browsing history. Someone had searched for nearby storage facilities and abandoned properties. That person was not Mara. Cell tower data placed her phone moving northward shortly after 3:30. It traveled for nearly 40 minutes, then stopped transmitting. Investigators mapped the route. It led toward an industrial zone outside the city, an area filled with closed warehouses, unused freight yards, and forgotten structures. Places where no one asked questions. Places where no one listened. The motive remained unclear. There was no ransom, no extortion, no demands, no messages, no attempt to contact her family. Psychological profiling suggested a different objective: control, preparation, fantasy fulfillment. The suspect had not chosen Mara for money, status, or connections. He had chosen her because she was accessible, independent, and predictable. She lived alone. She worked flexible hours. She trusted strangers. She was accustomed to handling equipment deliveries. She fit a pattern. Further investigation confirmed it. 3 years earlier, in another state, a woman named Claire Rowland had reported a similar encounter. A man had offered to help her carry a large package into her building. She declined. He insisted. She refused again. He left. 2 weeks later, she was assaulted in her parking garage by an unknown attacker. He was never caught. The description matched. A year later, another woman, Elena Perez, reported being followed after accepting help with furniture delivery. She escaped when a neighbor intervened. Same description, same behavior, same approach. He tested boundaries. He adjusted tactics. He learned from failure. Mara had been the first who did not escape. By now, investigators were no longer looking at an isolated crime. They were looking at a long-term predator, someone who planned, someone who rehearsed, someone who refined, someone who waited for compliance, and someone who had likely been waiting for years for a situation that aligned perfectly. A woman, a heavy package, an empty hallway, a blind spot, a moment of trust. What they still did not know was where he had taken her, or whether she was still alive. That answer would depend on how quickly they could find a man who had spent years learning how not to be found. By the time the investigation shifted fully into a multi-agency manhunt, nearly 3 weeks had passed since Mara Klein had walked into her apartment with a stranger and never walked out again. Every hour that followed reduced the probability of survival. Detectives understood this. They also understood that the man they were pursuing was not reckless, impulsive, or driven by panic. He was methodical. He had prepared for this moment long before Mara ever knew he existed. The search expanded beyond Brookfield. State police, federal analysts, and behavioral specialists joined the case. A centralized task force was formed. Every fragment of data was consolidated into a single system. Video footage, phone records, financial transactions, transit logs, shipping manifests, rental agreements, and online activity were cross-referenced and reanalyzed. The first priority was identity. No fingerprints had been recovered from Mara's apartment. Every surface he had likely touched had been wiped. No usable DNA was found. He had worn gloves. He had avoided leaving hair. He had controlled the environment. But he had made one mistake. On the inner flap of the cardboard box, forensic technicians found a partial latent print. It was faint, distorted, incomplete. It had likely been left while he handled the packaging before entering the apartment. It did not match any known criminal records. At first, it seemed useless. Then analysts compared it to prints collected from public library terminals, rental mailboxes, and convenience store counters connected to the prepaid phone purchase. A partial match emerged. Not a name, a pattern, a recurring biometric signature. The same unidentified individual had touched at least 6 separate locations connected to the case, which meant he had been active in the region for months. Mapping those locations revealed a geographic cluster north of Brookfield, centered around the abandoned industrial corridor. The same area indicated by cell tower data. Search teams focused there. They began with the most obvious sites: closed factories, empty warehouses, disused rail yards, decommissioned storage units. Each was cleared systematically. Dogs were deployed. Ground-penetrating radar was used in some areas. Drones surveyed rooftops and fenced compounds. Nothing. For 10 days, every search ended the same way. Empty buildings. Dust. Silence. Then a utility worker noticed something unusual. At a former refrigeration depot, electricity usage had spiked intermittently over the past month. The building was officially disconnected. No business operated there. No permits were active. Yet power was being drawn. Investigators obtained a warrant. They entered the building early on a Wednesday morning. Inside, they found signs of recent habitation. Portable generators, water containers, food packaging, medical supplies, soundproofing foam nailed to interior walls, a mattress, restraints, sedatives, and a locked metal room constructed inside a storage chamber. The lock had been professionally installed. When officers forced it open, they found biological evidence: hair, blood, personal items. Among them was Mara's bracelet. She was not there, but she had been. The site confirmed what investigators feared. She had been held alive. For an unknown period, under controlled conditions. Further analysis of the site revealed surveillance equipment, small cameras mounted in corners, a digital recorder, external hard drives. The drives were encrypted. It took specialists nearly a week to access the contents. What they found documented everything: preparation, transportation, confinement, psychological manipulation. The suspect had recorded his interactions, not for profit, not for blackmail, for private consumption, for reinforcement, for repetition. The recordings showed that Mara had been held for at least 9 days. She had been conscious for most of that time. Medical examiners later confirmed injuries consistent with prolonged restraint and deprivation. The final recording ended abruptly. It showed him packing equipment into a vehicle, dismantling the room, erasing files, leaving. The timestamp corresponded with a storm system that had passed through the region, a storm that had disrupted traffic cameras and cell networks. He had timed his departure. Cell phone triangulation placed his burner device traveling west 2 days later, then south, then disappearing. A new pattern emerged. License plate readers in multiple states detected a dark sedan with obscured registration passing through toll roads and rest stops. The vehicle's make and modifications matched footage from a gas station near the refrigeration depot. The suspect was moving, constantly, changing routes, avoiding metropolitan areas, using cash, sleeping in short-term motels under false names. Investigators tracked him through indirect data: water purchases, fuel receipts, ATM camera reflections, trash containing medical packaging. Each fragment added a piece. 2 months after Mara disappeared, a motel clerk in northern Nevada reported a guest who refused housekeeping, paid daily in cash, and covered his windows with towels. Police were alerted. A surveillance team was deployed. They monitored the room for 48 hours. During that time, he did not leave. On the third morning, officers approached. He opened the door calmly. He did not resist. He did not run. He did not speak. Inside the room, they found multiple devices, storage drives, sedatives, forged documents, and a detailed journal. The journal covered 6 years. It documented targets, schedules, failed attempts, observations, refinements. Mara's name appeared near the end. Marked, planned, executed. Under interrogation, he identified himself as Adrian Volkov, an alias. His real identity took weeks to uncover. He had abandoned his original name more than a decade earlier. He had lived transiently. He had never stayed in one place long enough to be known. He had no close relationships, no stable employment, no criminal history, no digital footprint under his real name. He had designed his life to be forgettable. Psychological evaluations described him as highly organized, emotionally detached, and driven by control-based compulsions. He did not express remorse. He described his actions as experiments. He referred to victims as variables. He admitted to Mara's abduction. He admitted to holding her. He denied killing her. For weeks, investigators believed she might still be alive somewhere. That hope ended when remains were discovered in a remote desert area, identified through GPS metadata, hidden in one of his archived files. Identification was confirmed through dental records. Mara had died from complications related to prolonged restraint and untreated injuries. The trial lasted nearly 4 months. Prosecutors presented recordings, journals, forensic evidence, and testimony from prior victims who had survived earlier encounters. The defense did not dispute the facts. They argued mental illness. The jury rejected it. He was convicted on multiple counts, including kidnapping, torture, and first-degree murder. He received multiple life sentences without parole. After sentencing, Mara's mother addressed the court. She did not speak about anger. She spoke about trust, about how her daughter believed most people were decent, about how a simple offer of help had destroyed an entire family. Following the case, apartment complexes across the state revised security protocols. Delivery procedures were changed. Public awareness campaigns warned against accepting unsolicited assistance in private spaces. But no policy could erase what had happened. Mara's final day had begun like any other. A last shift, a future job, a heavy package, a stranger who smiled, and a decision made in seconds. The investigation proved that moment was not random. It was the endpoint of years of planning. A predator waiting patiently for someone kind enough to say yes, and a reminder that danger does not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it arrives offering to carry a box